Mr. Chairman, H.R. 538 has been in the works for several years. This is not a bill that came out of nowhere. Its provisions are a result of oversight hearings and consultation with Indian tribes and Alaska Native corporations. The bill streamlines federal permitting and increases tribal control over the energy and other national resource development on Indian lands. It gives tribes options to perform or waive appraisals of their lands and prohibits the Interior Department's hydraulic fracturing from applying to Indian lands without the consent of the tribe. It also contains provisions to streamline judicial review and deter frivolous lawsuits concerning federal permitting for Native American energy projects. The judicial review provisions are crucial for Alaska Natives whose ability to develop their own land settlement lands have been abused by special interest groups filing lawsuits. The bill also authorizes a pilot project for the Navajo Nation to handle mineral leasing of its trust land if Interior approves its tribal leasing program. And finally, H.R. 538 promotes tribal forest stewardship contracting on federal lands adjacent to Indian reservations land to provide a full supply of biomass energy for the tribes. This summer, the GAO issued a report called Indian Energy Development. Poor management by BIA has hindered Indian Energy Department of Indian Lands. Here are a couple of highlights. The BIA does not have comprehensive data to identify ownership and resources available for development, does not have a documented process or data to track and monitor its review and response times, and some offices do not have the skills or adequate staff resources to effectively review energy-related documents. In 2012, the Interior Inspector General found that the weakness in the BIA's management of oil and gas resources contributed a general preference by industry to acquire oil and gas leases on non-Indian lands over Indian lands. This is a jobs bill. It provides energy for America, and more than that, it takes care of the tribal communities that have been blessed with resources. In some Indian reservations where unemployment rates are 50%, energy jobs are the only high-wage private sector jobs available for members. And these energy jobs, dollars go a long way to supporting families. The Native American Energy Act is strongly supported by the large group of Native organizations as well as the Chamber of Commerce. Specifically, the National Congress of American Indians, the Affiliated Tribes of the Northwest Indians, the Intertribal Timber Council, Navajo Nation, Southern Ute Tribe, Confederate Tribes of Colville Reservation, 3 affiliated tribes and the Fort Reservation, and the Utah Tribe of Utah. I am a little bit surprised that the White House has issued a statement against this bill. Really, it's not anything new. I always listen to this administration, above all, but none of the below, as far as energy goes. In other words, the administration promotes only wind and solar while opposing oil, gas, and coal on nations' lands. Nations' lands. In the Dakotas, it takes 15 permits on tribal lands and 2 off of tribal lands. Mr. Chairman, that is a disgrace. And I'm suggesting with 56 million acres of land, there ought to be the ability to be self-determined, be the first Americans, the ability to take and produce energy and help their tribal members out. And those that oppose this is the same old story. Don't get too smart. We'll give you a side of beef and a blanket. Don't let us help ourselves. Let the government tell you what to do. This is a good piece of legislation. This did not come from me. This came from the Native tribes themselves. And it's an example, as we have to trust authority, we should let them control their own destiny. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Alaska reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And frankly, we're still not addressing the most pressing needs in Indian country. 6 years later, the Carcieri decision still has not been fixed, despite much lip service that has been given to it from the majority. We have our colleague, Mr. Cole, colleague, Ms. McCollum, both have legislation, bipartisan legislation, that would deal with that immediately. We should call that up, we should have a hearing, and we should deal with this decision that has left so much doubt and confusion in Indian country. Sacred sites are in need of identification and protection. Rather than midnight riders attached to unrelated legislation that violates tribal sacred site protections, as has happened already. Lack of funding from this body, coupled with sequestration, has left Indian health and education reeling with no relief in sight. And yes, barriers to energy development on Indian lands are among the most pressing needs, both as an economic driver for tribes and for energy needs of the United States. This bill does not address the real energy needs on tribal lands, and while we are wasting time on it, these other and even more pressing needs just continue to grow more urgent. The legislation claims to facilitate energy development, but instead it short-circuits the review process set up by the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and limits judicial review of development decisions. Instead of helping tribes develop energy resources on their lands, this approach will lead to less environmental protection on Indian lands and less judicial recourse to those affected. And these proposals are not new. We have seen and debated them before as part of a failed Republican energy bills last Congress, and here they are again. The legislation would amend NEPA, one of the nation's bedrock environmental laws, to limit review of and comment on proposed projects to members of affected Indian tribes and other individuals residing within an undetermined affected area. This limitation severely restricts public involvement in the proposed federal projects that may affect the environment and a central tenet of NEPA. Arbitrarily limiting such review and comment would prevent even other Indian tribes with cultural ties in these so-called affected areas from commenting on a proposed project. Limiting the universe of members of the public who can participate in the NEPA process, but then failing to actually define that universe is not reform. It's not reform at all. Additionally, this restriction is not just applicable to energy projects, it applies to any major project on Indian lands. This could mean proposed mining contracts, proposed water development projects, construction of solid waste facilities, and even construction of tribal Class 3 gaming facilities, all would slip through this undefined loophole. And non-tribal partners would also reap this benefit as well, as long as the project is located on Indian lands. The legislation also throws up insurmountable barriers to those seeking to hold the federal government accountable for the actions in court. It prevents the recovery of attorney's fees in cases challenging energy projects and makes a claimant who fails to succeed on the merits of a suit potentially liable to the defendant for attorney's fees and costs. This makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for members of the public, even tribal members, whose homelands may be impacted by a major federal action of any kind, to seek judicial review. The other side will say this is a response to frivolous lawsuits that have been filed in these cases in the past. But according to the Department of Interior Solicitor's Office, very few approved energy-related projects have ever been challenged in court. This is truly a solution in search of a problem. It's clear the real intent of this provision is to chill legitimate litigation and to undermine the real teeth of NEPA by making the availability of injunctive relief all but disappear. Furthermore, this applies even to non-Indian land. If an energy company is developing natural resources anywhere in the United States and they get a tribal partner, they can fall under this provision. This could incentivize energy companies to partner with tribes simply for the benefit of skirting NEPA and profiting from restricted judicial review. The legislation is opposed by the administration as well as many environmental and conservation groups. I have here a letter in opposition to this legislation signed by many of these groups: the Alaska Wilderness League, Center for Biological Diversity, Defenders of Wildlife, Earth Justice, Green Latinos, the Lands Council, League of Conservation Voters, National Parks Conservation Association, National Resource Defense Council, Northern Alaska Environmental Center, San Juan Citizen Alliance, Sierra Club, Western Environmental Law Center, and the Wilderness Society. And, Mr. Chairman, I would ask that that be entered into the record.
The request will be covered under general leave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, instead of using energy development on Indian land as an excuse to weaken NEPA and judicial review, we should be concentrating on efforts on real reform that would achieve tribal self-determination in energy development. We should be dealing with the disparities in the tax code, that stymie investments in Indian country and create an unfair playing field. Tax credits and incentives for energy development that cities and communities have long used to their benefit, these needs to be available to tribes as well. We should be encouraging investment in the future of renewable energy on tribal lands. According to the Department of Energy Office of Indian Energy, Indian land contains an estimated 5% of all renewable energy resources, and the total energy potential for these resources is almost 14% of the total U.S. potential. In my home state of Arizona, there is a great potential for solar, wind, and geothermal energy on Indian land. We just need to fix the real issues that inhibit the investment to these projects. But this bill doesn't do that. Instead, the majority is here today to once again attack NEPA and judicial review, this time attempting to use this as a wedge issue, attempting to wedge between people that care about tribal self-determination as well as environmental stewardship. Picking between tribal sovereignty and responsible energy development is a false choice. We can have both. We can have successful energy development in Indian country while retaining the environmental protections that will ensure future generations of Native Americans, they too can enjoy the benefits of that economic development. I urge my colleagues to abandon this irresponsible proposal in favor of real tribal energy bill. And in the meantime, I would plead with my colleagues to bring legislation to the floor addressing Indian healthcare, Indian education programs, and a codified process for tribal consultation with federal agencies that respect sovereignty and upholds the trust responsibilities that we have to Indian country. And a fix, finally a fix, for the current cloud hanging over the status of so many trust lands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Alaska is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to mention one thing. I do have an amendment. At a future date. I'm speaking to the gentleman on NEPA. We don't change the NEPA policy at all, other than the fact that only those affected can have comments on how it affects their land, not a bunch from people from New York or Maine or, Dallas or Florida. So that's really a red herring that was drug across this bill. This is to help the tribes, and I yield to my good chairman of the full committee, whatever time he may consume.
The gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the gentleman from Alaska yielding. There are some Native American tribes that do not rely on gaming alone for their source of revenue. They can't. And it's amazing how often we hear dealing with North American Native tribes all of a sudden give lip service that we'd like to empower them until it actually have a chance to do so. And then all of a sudden we change. We're talking about a lot of tribes who have a great deal of land but very little employment. This bill, in fact, is based on recommendations that come from Indian country. And by that, I don't mean the Bureau of Indian Affairs, because they shamefully oppose this bill. I do mean groups like Southern Utah Utes and the Confederation Tribes of Colville and the National Congress of American Indians and the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians and community groups like the Chamber of Commerce. All of those people are realizing the importance of this particular bill in empowering Native Americans in this nation. I hope we do not turn this into a partisan affair by voting no on this bill, you might get 3 Democrat callers on C-SPAN to support your vote, but it still does not make that right. We need to do something differently. And in these areas in which the potential employment is based on agriculture and mining and energy, we don't need more regulations on the Native Americans than there are on everybody else. We don't need duplicative regulations on them more than anyone else. Instead, we need to streamline that so they can be successful in charting their own destiny and making their own choices. Far too often, we have too many people, unfortunately with titles around this place, that still have a paternalistic attitude towards Native Americans. That attitude has to change. And this is what this bill does. It is amazing sometimes when this administration says, well, if it deals with marijuana, they're a native tribe, they're sovereign country, let them do what they want to. But if it deals with agriculture and mining, well, not so fast. That's kind of like public lands. We still need to have some kind of control over that. That's the problem. Pot yes, energy no. Now, that doesn't work. We need these people to be able to make decisions for themselves. Appreciate the chairman of the subcommittee mentioning that he does have an amendment on NEPA which does solve those problems. This is not a NEPA issue. This is an issue on whether we truly believe in empowering Native Americans so they can make decisions for themselves and help their own people. I had a chairman of a tribe who wisely sat in my room and wisely said, you know, I don't care what game we play, I just want to know what the ball looks like. This bill gives them a chance to see the ball. It gives the Native Americans a chance to approve the design of the ball. And more importantly, it gives them a chance to win. So Lucy, please, just before contact, don't pull the ball away. Let the Native Americans win. This bill gives them an opportunity to win and chart their own destiny. That's why they support it, and that's why we should vote for it. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alaska reserves.
Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman
Chairman.
from Arizona is recognized.
The GAO report what has been mentioned many times throughout about the rationale behind and the catalyst behind this particular legislation. And yes, the conclusions, which I agree with, is that we are not living up to our responsibilities as it applies to energy development in Indian lands. But reading the recommendations, nowhere does it say that the solution to the problem is to gut NEPA or to stifle judicial recourse. Instead, the recommendations talk about resources that are needed by Indian country to successfully fulfill their obligation and responsibilities to their members. It talks about staffing shortages, outdated mapping systems, and the need to ensure that the BIA can provide support to the tribes on energy programs. These are things the BIA has asked for in their budget, that the president's budget has sent over, has requested time and time again. Funding these requests go unheeded by this majority. So it's disingenuous, as the majority does time and time again, to starve an agency or a program of needed funding and then to complain that that agency program is ineffective. It is also disingenuous to say that the responsibility to work with and honor our trust responsibility to Indian country is always it's down to the choice in this legislation whether you vote yes or no. As I stated in my opening statement, there is a litany of pressing issues that face Indian country and Native Americans in our nation. A litany of benign neglect for many, many years, of which all bear responsibility. But with that responsibility comes also the opportunity to act. The fix is necessary so that is quelled on a bad Supreme Court decision. We need the adequate funding so that the trust responsibility that we inherit as members of Congress is upheld. We need programs of infrastructure in Indian country. We need many, many issues to address not only the human needs, but the economic needs of Indian country. And to say that this bill is the watershed moment that is going to turn all that benign neglect and irresponsibility backwards is disingenuous at best. I would suggest that let's talk about a real comprehensive approach to the issue of Indian country and the support this Congress needs to give to our trust responsibility. And if we do that, I'm sure all of us collectively could come to the same conclusions, that we need to do something and that there is before us legislations from both sides of the aisles that begin to address it. This legislation is not it. It is not a panacea, and to pit the trust responsibility this Congress has and to question whether sovereignty is supported or not by members that oppose this is not fair. The fairness in this would have been an energy bill that is comprehensive. The fairness would have been not to gut NEPA, judicial review, and present a bill that is clean and upholds bedrock environmental laws and it's not complicated, upholds the trust responsibility that we have when we swear an oath of office to serve in this Congress. And with that, I reserve the balance.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves. Gentleman from Alaska is recognized.
I yield at this time 3 minutes to the lady from Washington, Catherine McMorris.
The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the gentleman yielding. And I rise to join in support of the Native American Energy Act. Having an all-of-the-above energy policy means all people in all communities. Each community across the country should have the opportunity to unleash the natural resources closest to them to help meet their energy needs. And for those of us in the Pacific Northwest, it means encouraging biomass. You know, we've just had a devastating wildfire season, and the issue of forest health continues to be on the forefront. Fallen trees, overgrowth, general mismanagement have led to worsening fire seasons. By encouraging forest products for biomass, we would add and have a benefit of reducing forest fire risk by keeping our lands healthier, in addition to creating a stable energy source. This legislation allows a pilot project to encourage greater biomass production on tribal forest land. In my district in eastern Washington, it would help the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, who already play a very active role in forest management, new tools at their disposal to maintain the health of the adjacent forest to the reservation. It would help them develop energy and, most importantly, help them protect their homeland. I'm proud to support this legislation and encourage my colleagues to do the same. And I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Alaska reserves. Gentleman from Arizona
Continue
is
to
recognized.
reserve, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves. Gentleman from Alaska is recognized.
At this time, I yield to Mr. Tipton from Colorado, 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to give my voice and strong support for the Native American Energy Act. I'd also like to be able to thank Chairman Young and Chairman Bishop for their leadership and support of Native American energy development. Energy resource development on Native American lands is important and becoming increasingly significant year after year. For example, in 2014, responsible conventional energy development on Native American lands alone generated revenues of $24 billion. This revenue figure does not include renewable energy development on tribal lands, which has the potential to increase revenues, jobs, and household incomes for Native American communities. I'm privileged to be able to represent the Southern Ute Indian Tribe located in southwest Colorado. Some of my colleagues know that the Southern Ute Tribe is a model of tribal governance and economic development. The tribe is widely known as the premier natural gas developer and the largest employer in the region. I'm extremely proud that the Southern Ute Indian Tribe continues to take the lead in demanding that the federal government respect self-determination and tribal decision-making when it comes to energy and environmental regulation. To his credit, Chairman Young continues to allow numerous oversight hearings and legislative hearings to allow tribal leaders to illustrate the challenges they face daily as they attempt to develop their natural resources so that they can provide programs, services, and jobs for their nations. The result is H.R. 538, which will remove the number of these barriers. The legislation streamlines the appraisal process that must be undertaken by the Department of Interior because the status quo has resulted in delays that have cost the tribe to miss out on royalty payments totaling more than $95 million. The legislation also amends the Tribal Forest Protection Act of 2004 to direct the Department of Interior to enter into agreements with tribes to carry out demonstration projects that promote biomass energy production on Native American forest land and in nearby communities by providing tribes with reliable supplies of woody biomass from federal lands. It also prohibits the Interior rule regarding hydraulic fracturing from having any effect on land held in trust or restricted status for Native Americans, except with the express consent of the Indian beneficiaries. The Southern Utes' repeated attempts to ensure tribal lands were not included in this misguided rule were completely disregarded by this administration. Fortunately, H.R. 538 promotes Native American self-determination, strengthens tribal sovereignty, and reinforces our commitment to tribal self-sufficiency. I urge my colleagues to support this vital legislation and once again thank Chairman Young for his leadership and Chairman Bishop on this issue. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alaska reserves. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Mr. Chair, continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Alaska is recognized.
At this time, I'll yield gentleman Mr. Gosar from Arizona, 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to express my support of this common sense legislation. This bill empowers Native Americans to invest in their communities, their people, and their resources as they see fit, without the heavy hand of Washington bureaucracy trying to insert itself between them and their own land. Under current policy, potential resource development on tribal lands face many obstacles that projects on private or state lands do not. Before entering into a lease agreement with energy developers on their own land, a tribe must first attempt to navigate the long, slow, and duplicative process of the Department of Interior's approval. This process can be fraught with litigation and delays that chase away potential investments and crush otherwise viable projects. The Native American Energy Act streamlines many of the duplicative federal regulatory hurdles that prevent tribes or individuals from profitably developing energy resources on their land. This will provide tribes with greater control over how they best develop their own natural resources and allows them to do so in ways that will best benefit their communities, not a D.C. bureaucrat's ideology. Because of the common sense of and empowering reforms it contains, this bill has widespread support from the Indian tribes. It is odd that only groups on record in opposition to this bill are the Obama administration and some of the same old Democratic members of the Natural Resources Committee. Why does the administration continue to insist that bureaucrats from their comfy leather chairs and marble offices in Washington, D.C. know more about how to manage Indian land than the tribes themselves? If Congress is actually serious about supporting tribal efforts to generate high-paying jobs and improving the everyday standard of living in American Indian communities, this bill is a real, concrete way to empower them to do so. I commend the chairman and the committee for their work on this bill, and I strongly urge my colleagues to support it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alaska reserves. Gentleman from Arizona.
Mr. Chair, continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves. Gentleman from Alaska is recognized.
At this time, I'll yield to Mr. Pierce from New Mexico, 3 minutes.
Gentleman from New Mexico is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, the gentleman from Alaska, for bringing this legislation forward. In my hometown of Hobbs, New Mexico, truck drivers were making $100,000 a year. They didn't have to have a college degree, not even a high school diploma. And yet we limit this sort of opportunity on tribal lands. This bill is fairly simple. Simply let them free. Let them free to develop their lands in the way they want to. I heard one of my colleagues say that there are no frivolous lawsuits. Just this week, the Wild Earth Guardians were found to have filed a frivolous lawsuit on matters such as these, trying to stop development, trying to hold things up. And the judge says this is frivolous. It's the Kirkpatrick versus, our Wild Earth Guardians versus Kirkpatrick decision that is very recent. We were told that there are a litany of issues that we should be dealing with. I will tell you that Native Americans are sophisticated enough to take care of their own problems. They just need the opportunity to have jobs. They need the opportunity for economic development inside their own nations. Just recently, we hosted in New Mexico a gathering of different tribes who are looking at investments in oil and gas. And one lady said, my son is working in North Dakota for $60,000 a year. He should be working here on the reservation in the oil and gas industry for $60,000 a year. That's the urgency that I'm sensing on the reservations. The reservations are beginning to build their own houses, and they're doing magnificent work. They're becoming self-determinant. But we here in Washington say we know better. Mr. Young's bill says that we don't know better. Just let them develop what they want. Take the shackles off, take the chains loose, and let the American spirit that is on the reservations live and breathe. It's a very simple concept, but one some have a very difficult time accepting. I say vote for H.R. 538 and put them free. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alaska reserves. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves.
Does the
Gentleman from Alaska is
gentleman have
recognized.
any other speakers?
Just to close the
I'm ready
statement.
to close. Yes, I yield back. You yield your time.
Yep.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you very much. I just want to note that the Democrats on the Natural Resources Committee filed several amendments to this bill. We felt and our amendments were squarely within the House rules. Sadly, the majority on rules failed to make any of our amendments in order. One of these rejected amendments would have fixed the terrible mess created by the decision in Kerchieri. If you want to help tribes in a legitimate, co-equal way, control their own lands and move closer and closer to self-determination, you have to address this problem. And it is telling that my friends on the other side have refused to even address the bill or to have a legitimate hearing on the bill. Let me just, in closing, the statement for administrative policy while the administration supports, let me quote, the need to facilitate energy development in the country, it does not support H.R. 538. The Native American Energy Act. This bill would undermine public participation and transparency of review of projects on Indian lands under the National Environmental Policy Act, set unrealistic deadlines and remove oversight for appraisals of Indian land or trust assets, and prohibit awards under the Equal Access to Justice Act or payment of fees or expenses to a plaintiff from the judgment fund in an energy-related action. By foreclosing the judgment fund, this provision would negatively impact the Indian Affairs budget that is intended to serve all tribes. In addition, this bill changes to mineral leasing laws applicable to Navajo Nation's land may adversely affect energy development on these lands. The bill also stipulates that Indian lands are exempt from the Department of Interior's hydraulic fracking rule. That rule already contains a provision allowing for variances from the rule's requirements when tribal laws meet or exceed the rule standards. The rule approach both protects environmental and trust resources while also protect decision-making of the tribes. Overall, H.R. 538 would not ensure diligent development of resources on Indian land. The administration appreciates the committee's efforts to address energy needs in Indian country. Income from energy development is one of the largest sources of revenue generated from trust lands, and delays in development translate to delays in profits to Indian mineral rights owners. The administration has been taking meaningful action to update the leasing process for lands held in trust for Indian tribes and is actively working to expedite appraisals, leasing, and permitting on Indian lands and to provide resources to ensure safe and responsible development. The administration looks forward to working with Congress to develop the reforms necessary to support this development. The point being that this legislation is a rush to judgment. It is a gift it is a gift in a sense when you exempt from the judicial review and from NEPA the production of and exploration and production of energy on Indian land. This is, as co-equals, these environmental protections and public processes are intended for all. And so rather than be patronizing as co-equals and within our trust responsibility, this bill should be rejected and we should work on a comprehensive energy opportunity legislation that truly recognizes self-determination and for all members of tribes provides the environmental, public health, and judicial process that would guarantee them that they would be treated equal under the law. With that, I yield back the remainder of our time.
The gentleman from Arizona yields back. The gentleman from Alaska is recognized.
Madam Chair, in closing, I'd like to suggest one thing. This bill came from the tribes, not from the Sierra Club and not from the Friends of this and not from the all 28 different organizations have nothing to do with the tribes. And I've said all along, and I'm pretty well related to the Athabascan tribe in Alaska, it's time they are given the opportunity to fulfill the Self-Determination Act that we passed. Words do not do that. This administration has these great conferences and they invite everybody down and winky and they have a good time and nothing happens administratively. Now, I know there's some legislation, and I'm working very hard to get legislation, but I can't do it all. I have to do it one little step at a time. This bill is requested by the American Indians to have more control over their lands. I have to remind this Congress that I sit in, we're now ranked in the nations around the world 20th in the freedom category. We've gone from number 1 to 20th. Think about that. But the American Indians, our first people, are 30th in freedom because of our so-called free government. Now, there's something wrong with that. We're doing an incorrect thing, as trustees, by not allowing them to expand their God-given right, their ability, their intellectual capability, to expand their self-worth and keep their identity. And every time we try to bring a bill forward to do that, it's looked about we can do it better administratively. That's why they're ranked 30th in freedom, because of our government. I want everybody to think about this in Congress. From number 1, freest nation in the world, to right now 20. That's not a good thing. In the last 5 years, we've dropped 3 spaces in that freedom chart, mainly because of overreach, regulation, and dictation by our government. That's what it's based on. Individual freedoms are lost. Try that as a tribe and have to go through all the other steps that the other person doesn't have to. They drop down to 30th. So I'm asking the people in this body to support this bill. If you believe in self-determination, you believe in self-sufficiency, if you believe for the right to get ahead, especially in nations, by this Congress that gave them the ability to be self-determined, they really take it away. So this is a good piece of legislation. A piece of legislation should be voted yes on, and we should get the chance for the American Indian to go forth, as I know they have the capability of. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Alaska yields back. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 11430. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in Part A of House Report 114-290. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. For now, in order to consider amendment number 1, printed in Part A of House Report 114-290. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alaska seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment. It's made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part A of House Report number 114-290, offered by Mr. Young of Alaska.
Pursuant to House Resolution 466, the gentleman from Alaska, Mr. Young, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alaska.
Madam Chairman, this amendment clarifies who may submit public comments on NEPA, a study concerning a federal permit or land approval for Indian lands. It also preserves current NEPA requirements concerning tribal gaming proposals. When NEPA study is done on federal action, like a mineral lease approval on Indian lands, the agency must consider comments received by any member of the public, regardless whether they're affected. This is unfair to the tribe because tribal lands are not public lands. They're private lands. Section 4 of the bill limits public comment in these situations to the tribe, individuals who live within the affected area of the project. They see them outside the reservation. Section 4 was drafted. We expected an individual living within the affected area would include state, tribal, and county officials, but no one from New York or San Francisco. It's none of their business. To address any ambiguity, the amendment would clarify that tribes, states, and county governments within the area affected may have their comments considered along with those of individuals. And finally, the amendment provides that Section 4 will not affect federal actions related to tribal gaming. Gaming is a unique area of law. A proposal final facilities have a significant impact outside the local area, especially when it's off-reservation facilities. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Alaska reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I rise in opposition to the manager's amendment, but to claim time in opposition, although not in opposition.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I just want to tell Chairman Young that I appreciate the lipstick on this particular piece of legislation, but the content is still haphazard. It does not fix the underlying problem with public review and judicial review, and but we are not in opposition, but I appreciate the lipstick.
Does the gentleman yield back? The gentleman
Yield back, thank you.
Gentleman from Arizona yields back. The gentleman from Alaska is recognized.
By a good ranking member, I hope it was the right color. I will yield back the balance of time.
Gentleman from Alaska yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Alaska. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 2, printed in Part A of House Report 114-290. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New Mexico seek recognition?
Madam Chairwoman, I have an amendment made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part A of House Report number 114-290, offered by Ms. Michelle Lujan Grisham of New Mexico.
Pursuant to House Resolution 466, the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Lujan Grisham, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New Mexico.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume, and now I rise in support of my amendment that allows the Forest Service to establish a pilot program to execute contracts with tribes under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, known as 638 contracts. 638 contracts allow tribes to manage and implement federal programs in Indian country. When I was the New Mexico Secretary of Health, I witnessed how successful and beneficial these contracts can be at efficiently delivering services to tribes. Through these contracts, tribes can operate hospitals, health clinics, mental health facilities, and a variety of other community health services. Having tribes manage and operate programs in their communities not only recognizes tribal self-determination and self-governance, but it also helps ensure that tribal needs are being met through traditionally and culturally appropriate methods. Although several agencies have the authority to execute 638 contracts, such as the Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and Indian Health Services, the Forest Service does not have this authority. Several tribes have expressed to me that they would like to see the Forest Service have this authority. Many of the pueblos in New Mexico have land and tribal forests adjacent to national forests, and we know that wildfires and pests can quickly affect entire regions, regardless of who owns the land. And in fact, the Los Conchas wildland fire, which is one of the largest wildfires in New Mexico history, started on June 26, 2011 in the Santa Fe National Forest and burned more than 156,000 acres in New Mexico, including land belonging to pueblos of Santa Clara, Oque-Awinge, San Ildefonso, Poake, and Cochiti and Kewa. So it is imperative that the Forest Service and tribes actively work together to co-manage forests. This amendment previously passed by voice vote as part of the Resilient Federal Forest Act, which the House passed this July. I urge my colleagues to once again support my amendment, which will improve the Forest Service's ability to partner with tribes to work on projects that impact tribal lands and forests. I yield back.
Does the gentlewoman yield back or reserve?
Yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back.
Madam
For
Chairman.
what purpose does the gentleman from Alaska seek
Madam Chairman,
recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to claim time in opposition to the amendment, and I do not oppose the amendment. I just want to congratulate the lady on backing up what's in the bill, making this correct, And we've had testimony from a lot of the timber tribes and how well they've managed their timber. And right next door will be the Forest Service land that's managed terribly. And that's a threat to the tribal timber, too. But I really think if we want to get back on this track of the freedoms I was talking about, if we allow the tribes to contract with the Forest Service, make it a contract on thinning, silviculture, encouraging growth, managing growth for a future timber need. The native tribes are doing so much better than the federal tribes. So I compliment the lady on this deal, and I accept the amendment. I just think you're doing a great job. Thank you. I appreciate it. And yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from New Mexico. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Amended. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Accordingly, under the rule, the committee rises.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union has under consideration H.R. 538, and pursuant to House Resolution 466, I report the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 538, and pursuant to House Resolution 466, reports the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered, and a separate vote demanded on any amendment to the amendment reported from the Committee of the Whole. If not, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The question is on engrossment. Third reading of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to facilitate the development of energy on Indian lands by reducing federal regulations that impede tribal development of Indian lands and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
I'm opposed in its current form.
The gentleman qualifies. Clerk, report the motion.
Mr. Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 538, to the Natural Resources Committee with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. At the end of the bill, add the following. Section 10, Physical Integrity of Sacred Sites. Nothing in this act shall contravene the authority of the President to avoid adversely affecting the physical integrity of any site identified as sacred by virtue of established religious significance to or ceremonial use by an Indian religion under Executive Order 13007, May 24th, 1996.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this is the final amendment to the bill, which does not kill the bill or send it back to committee. If adopted, the bill will immediately proceed to final passage as amended. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to offer an amendment to protect sacred sites across America. This issue is not a new one. We've been part of many debates here on the floor and in committee on this important issue. The amendment is straightforward. It reads, nothing in this act shall contravene the authority of the President to avoid adversely affecting the physical integrity of any site identified as sacred by virtue of established religious significance to or ceremonial use by an Indian religion under Executive Order 13007. Mr. Speaker, as we come from different faiths, we all have respect for one another. Just as we worship in different places like churches or temples, so too should we have respect for these sacred places. Just as we would honor the sanctity of where our loved ones have been laid to rest, so too should we honor the sanctity of tribal sacred sites. Sacred sites are an essential part of the culture and heritage of tribal communities, and the degradation of these sites means a loss of identity, as well as disrespect for the faith and religion, the culture, and the history of our tribal brothers and sisters who are connected to these lands. Sacred sites should not be desecrated. They should be protected. And I know it's a sentiment that many of us in this Congress share. Protecting sacred sites is the right thing to do. And I ask my colleagues to join me in supporting this very important amendment. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alaska seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the motion to recommit.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
There's nothing in this act that changes the president's authority, and I go back to self-determination. These are tribal lands, owned by the tribes, controlled by the tribal council, and they'll make a decision about the sacred sites. Not somebody, again, in Miami or New York that want to stop the project. These are tribal sites. And that's the thing I don't quite understand. This affects nothing of the present law. If they decide this is a sacred site, that'll be their decision instead of someone else. So I urge people to reject this motion to recommit, and let's pass this legislation as one little tiny step forward for our First Americans. This bill came from them and supports it and asked me. And they're not worried about these sacred sites because they will control them, not somebody else official. We take no authority away from the president. So this, very frankly, Mr. Chairman, is a motion to recommit to slow the bill down and say it doesn't, but that's an attempt to do so. So I urge a no on the motion to recommit and a yes on the passage for that little tiny step for the American Indians, our first people. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The noes have it. The motion is not adopted.
The yeas and nays, please.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage of the bill. This is a 15-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 184 and the nays are 239. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, on that I ask for the ayes and nays.
The yeas and the nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 252 and the nays are 1.
Mr. Fortenberry. Mr. Fortenberry votes aye. Mr. Dent. Mr. Dent votes aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 254 and the nays are 173. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
If you don't mind clearing the well, please, and call us to order. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches.